Let me apologize for the tardiness. We had some things that had to be rescheduled, and Pastor was going to speak initially at 9. His schedule changed suddenly this morning, and he is still in a meeting at this time with some other people. Dr. Anderson is here, so we're going to have Dr. Anderson go on in a few minutes, and then Rev will fall in sometime later in the morning, and maybe not at all. Dr. Anderson's presentation, his total presentation is about 8 hours. I have heard this man speak on 2 prior occasions, as recently as about 4 months ago up in Harlem at the National Black Theater. I was at a business conference there. But Dr. Claud Anderson, and I'm reading from the bio, is the author of Black Labor, White Wealth. It's a book we have outside. It's an excellent book, historically and economically. And that is a search for power and economic justice. He is president of the Harvest Institute. It is a new think tank built upon the solutions presented in his book and to effect a social and economic reform in Black America. On a national speaking tour to promote this institute, solutions based upon his book and an upcoming series of audio book tapes, Powernomics. Dr. Anderson is stirring Black America and with exciting audiences with his analysis of the Black problems and the pragmatic corrective prescriptions he presents. According to Essence Magazine, Emerge, and Jet magazines, the book is a bestseller and is cherished by Black thought throughout the country. Dr. Anderson has a broad and varied base of experience spanning education, business, federal and state politics, and successful social reform. Dr. Anderson was the state coordinator of education for Governor Reuben Askew of Florida for 7 years during the period of integration. And during that time, he founded the State Action Council, a coalition of Black leaders for political action in Florida. He was appointed by former President Jimmy Carter to serve as the Assistant Secretary of the United States Department of Commerce, where he headed the Coastal Plains Regional Commission, which was responsible for funding and directing economic development activities for governors in the southeastern United States. He has served as executive director to 2 economic development corporations for the city of Miami, Florida. He was appointed special assistant to the CEO of the 1988 Atlantic Democratic National Convention and political consultant for the 1992 New York Democratic Convention. He's a real estate developer, maintains ownership interests in retail food businesses, and was among the first African Americans to own a radio station. He has taught at practically all levels of the educational field and served as a professor at several universities. Dr. Anderson, a popular speaker, is igniting a national movement of social and economic reform amongst Blacks with his lectures and Powernomics workshops. He lectures frequently to business groups, universities, churches, and social organizations on economic, social, and political solutions. And he proposes to help Black America become more competitive and self-efficient. More recently, he was a speaker at the Essence Music Festival in New Orleans and the NAACP National Convention in Charlotte. Brothers and sisters, at this time, I am happy to present to you Dr. Claud Anderson.
First of all, let me thank you for that. Okay. I'm okay? See all this attention I get on a Saturday morning. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much again for the introduction. Let me say good morning to each of you. and also to you collectively for having come out this morning and having invited me to be a part of your Men's Day program here at St. Paul's Congregational Church. And it is a pleasure to be back again. I haven't been here for about 2 or 3 years now. What is it, 2 years? 2 years, okay. So you all been sliding since I've been gone. Okay? And I'm back again to try to raise as much hell as I did the last time with you. And see if you've been doing some of the things and admonishments that I asked you to carry out since I left here. Okay? But I do want to try to run through some things with you this morning. I think I would have how much time? An hour and a half, an hour and 15 minutes or something like that? Okay. And what they want me to do is again try to talk about what black folks should be about the business of doing, what they're actually actualizing. And one of the things that I've picked up all over this country is the fact that there's a major disconnect with black people in America. And just with my books alone, Black Labor, White Wealth, which has been a bestseller in America, I guess now for at least 3 years, and it's been a bestseller in Bermuda and Barbados and Brazil. And even I've been honored with the fact that Ebony and Jet calls it the Bible in Black America for economic development and political development. And a new book's coming out called Powernomics, which shows you how to carry out all the things I'm talking about. But I still am very concerned over the fact that black people can read that book and can read those books and hear me on all these talk shows over again saying, do this, quit doing this, and they still sit there and do the same thing all over again. And see, that's why I get angry with black people. I get very angry. That's because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And get back to the point that was raised this morning. They said, Dr. Anderson, what do you think are the major problems in America for black folk? And what is in any of my books, what is Powernomics, what is Dirty Little Secrets, or it's Black Labor, White Wealth. And I'm speaking all over the country saying the same thing every day the Lord sends to the earth. I'm on a different radio talk show. The crowds now get up to 6,000 and 7,000 people. Last in New Orleans, 20,000 to 30,000. No black person in America pulls as many black people for audience that I do. Maybe Farrakhan, but even he does it only with the help of the church. Nobody walks in and pulls that many people. And yet when I leave, they still don't do any things. Over and over again, keep doing the same things. We as black folk, you only got 2 problems. You only got 2 problems in America for black folk. So it's not that hard, not that difficult to figure out what you're supposed to be doing. If you can break away and disengage from all your institutional black leaders who keep leading you down the wrong paths. You only got 2 problems, and I know my people are bright enough to figure out what those 2 problems are and do it. Your first problem is that you've been systematically, socially engineered into the lowest level of a real-life monopoly game. You want me to give that to you again so you understand what I'm saying to you? You've been systematically, socially engineered into the lowest level of a real-life monopoly game. That means that you live in a society now where whites, the dominant white society, controls almost 100% of all the income, the wealth, the power, the privileges, the businesses, and all levels of government. You as a people, we as a people do not own or control a sufficient amount of anything to be competitive. That's your number 1 problem. Don't waste your time letting your civil rights leaders, anybody else, sidetrack you into the minutia. There is nothing else. Don't work your time worrying about food stamps, welfare, low-income housing, drug abuse, unemployment. Those are symptoms of the problem. Those are symptoms. Now, I'll tell you now, even as a medical practitioner, if you come to the hospital and a person has a fever, don't waste your time trying to deal with the fever. Get rid of the infection, and the fever will disappear. Quit messing around with food stamps, welfare, drug abuse, crime, teenage pregnancy. Those are symptoms. That's not the problem. The problem is what you're locked into, that you don't own and control anything. And as long as you don't own and control anything, you're expendable, exposable, and you're vulnerable, and you're through in America. Because as you move into the next century, the 21st century, black folk are through. You cannot go into the next century owning absolutely nothing. Now, nobody's going to tell you that but me. I'm the only fool around the country that's big enough to tell you that you are through as a race of people. You got about 2 years left, and the window's going to slam shut on you. That window slams shut, don't worry about retiring anymore. Don't worry about going to college anymore. I'm going to tell you up front. Don't waste your time. You're not going to make it. You got 2 years to either get your act together or hang it up. And you walk out of this cathedral today, the first thing you must say is that what Dr. Anderson is saying, no more disconnect. No more disconnecting. You got to start internalizing and operationalizing and implementing everything I'm talking about the day you leave here this afternoon and for the rest of your lives if you're going to make it. You know, the time has run out. And that's the problem with America. With black people, we keep trying to feel that somehow we're going to make it in spite of our conditions. That by dealing with the fever, that somehow the affection will disappear. It's not going to go away. Nothing has changed for black folk in over 400 years. Contrary to anybody tells you, there's a myth going around that black people are progressing. You're not progressing. In analytical, social analytical terms, in a comparative basis, proportional terms, we are exactly where we were in 1840s. That's 150 years ago. Nothing has changed for you. But you keep letting people sell you dogs that won't hunt. Telling you that somehow black folk are progressing by saying, look at Bill Cosby, look at Michael Jackson, look at Tiger Woods, see how well you black folk are doing? Those people do not reflect black America's condition. They don't. Those are exceptions to the rule. The masses of black folk now in comparative terms are exactly where they were. We got to steal the same amount of wealth. As a matter of fact, the wealth in America has not changed for black folk except less than 1/2 of 1% since 1860. That's on the eve of the Civil War, when black folk only had 1/2 of 1% of the wealth. And if you take from 1860 up to the present time, you go through a civil war, a major catastrophic war, civil war. You go through Reconstruction. You go through World War I. You go through the Great Depression. You go through World War II. You go through the Vietnam War. You go through the Korean War. And you go through the Civil Rights Movement and all those major events, and the wealth in America for black folk shifted just barely 1/2 of 1%. Now you live in a society, in a capitalist society. That's what you live in. You live in capitalism. Capitalism means what you own and control. And we as a people don't own and control anything. Now, what does that mean is going to happen to us then? That means it's already started. We're going to be forced into a permanent underclass. We got 7 major converging issues that are going to force us right into an underclass structure. Now, what is an underclass? An underclass are those people who are forced to live hand to mouth, generation after generation after generation and forever as either beggars or criminals. That's what we're going into. And it's because of your monopoly game. Now, before I explain those 7 factors, for those who don't understand monopoly. Now, I play it every year in my family. It's a regular thing. We give out little trophies. Let me tell you what monopoly means. Monopoly means when you sit down at a game, and the whole point of it is controlling land starting out, for instance. Then you have money distributed out to people that are playing the game. And see, with black folk, you never got your land, first of all. You never got the 40 acres and a mule. So most blacks don't own any land. You're sitting in a game where the cardinal rule is you must own land. And almost 99% of the blacks sitting in the game don't even own any land. Now, how are you going to play a game that's based on land you don't own any land? Even back in 1920, blacks owned 20 million acres of land in the United States. They've lost it all. They're down to about less than 400,000 acres of land left in the entire United States now. You don't own any land anymore. That's why the black farmers came to Washington screaming about 2 months ago. Nobody cares. How can you play in a monopoly game, which is capitalism, you don't own any land? Now, the other thing about owning land is that you must have money to play the game with. And see, money has been distributed in America based on skin color, going white, yellow, brown, black. As you go down the color scheme, the less money you get. So let's pretend, for the sake of our little game, that whites got $1,000 to play the game of Monopoly, Asians got 800, browns, Hispanics got something like about 500, Indians got 400, blacks got $50 to play the game with. Because you'd see again, you didn't get your $200 when you went past go. Because see, all the years that you were enslaved, you didn't get any money. All the years that you were Jim Crow, you didn't get any money. That's why in 1968, in the Civil Rights Movement, ran into blacks all through Mississippi, Mississippi and Alabama, who had never seen real money in their lives. This is in 1968, never seen money in their lives. These are old blacks. Never seen real money. You'd show them a dollar bill, they'd never seen it, didn't know what it was. So you never got your 40 acres and a mule. And then you didn't get your money. Now you're sitting there playing the game. Now in Monopoly, you know to win the game, you must own land and you must have enough money to do what? Buy houses and put hotels on the property. If you don't have any money to improve you don't own any property, you don't have any money to improve your property either. So now you're in a dilemma. So you roll the dice in our little game, and your number comes up on the wrong piece of property that somebody else owns. And they got houses and hotels on it, and you land on it. Then what happens to you? You must either go bankrupt or you go to jail. That's called being an underclass, where your option is always to either go bankrupt or go to jail because you cannot afford to pay the price. That's what black folk as a race is locked into. Now that you're locked into that, you're ironically getting ready to get pushed into a permanent underclass. And that's what this whole issue about now, about the President's Commission on Racism. Because nobody wants to understand what racism is about. They pretend that they don't know what racism is about. They've tried to pretend that racism is a moral issue. Because our civil rights leaders keep giving the impression that racism is a moral issue. You hear Jesse all the time talking about taking the high ground, that it's a moral equivalent, a moral issue within a moral war. It is not moral. It's never been moral. It is an economic issue, a power issue. That's what it's always been. And racism started out and never existed, except it was a relationship, a fighting relationship of power and wealth between white men and black men. That's what it's always been. Racism never existed as a concept until it started. You never had there was no such thing as racism until the 1600s. Until white people started enslaving black folk for economic purposes. That's when racism started. No such thing as racism. You never had the concept. You couldn't even be a slave on earth because of racism. You could only be a slave by three things. You could be a slave because of personal indebtedness to somebody, that you didn't pay them the money you owed them. You could be a slave because you were a victim of religious persecution, or you could be a slave because you were a prisoner of war. That was it. Until capitalism started. When capitalism says, I can take an individual, I can take a man, and I can profit off of his labor and pay him nothing. As long as I control the resources. Capitalism means where one person controls the resources, the wealth, the power, and the tools, and uses another man's labor to make money off of it. Capitalism never existed on earth either. You never had capitalism or racism. So when they started enslaving people, the white man went straight after the black male, contrary to what you hear from black women. It never had anything to do with black women. Racism had nothing to do with black women. That's why up until the Revolutionary War, we had been enslaved in America for over 150 years, but it never had anything to do with black women. Don't let people get you talk to this women's stuff about we got a women's issue. It wasn't no women's issue. Over 70% of all the slaves brought into America were black men. White men wanted the biggest, burliest, strongest thing he could get so he can work him to death before he's 40 years of age. That was what racism was about. So when you understand racism now, when you hear Clinton talking about racism, I want you all to be prepared in your own worlds to say, nobody's going to run racism on me again and not understand what they're talking about. Racism is a power relationship between two groups of people where one has now so much control in that monopoly of wealth and power and resources that it can now misuse or abuse another group to its own advantage. That's what racism is. And I feel black folk going around the country, and every time a white person charges black people with being racist, the black person responds. You see, somebody says, well, we're going to abuse black folk. The black people say, you can't do that to me. See, you black folk are racist. A black person cannot be a racist. There's no way he can be a racist. And I get disgusted every time I hear somebody on TV saying that black people are racist and charging somebody, like they say Farrakhan is a racist. Farrakhan cannot be a racist. Farrakhan does not control and own enough resources and power and wealth to be able to deprive the white race. And when people use that word, you stop them cold. I said, no. Racism started with slavery. Black folk have always been in the same position that they're in now ever since slavery started. How can he get on top? When did he get control of all the wealth and resources to be able to hurt white folk? And that's why when you go back through history, you cannot find not one single solitary instance any place in history where black people have gone out of their way to get enough wealth and resources to be able to hurt whites. Never happened. But I can show you, on the other hand, stacks of issues, laws, social customs, public policies where whites have pulled their wealth together to do black folk in over and over and over and over again. That is racism, where one group continues to do in another group by using its resources. So when somebody uses the word racist, just because a black person is responding, you stop them cold and say, we don't have any black racists. We cannot have black racists. We don't own enough and control enough. We've never been able to demonstrate anything against you. And that way, see what they got black folk doing is every time whites begin to misuse or hurt black folk, if black folks scream and try to respond to it, they say, well, you all are racist. No, black people, the best we can be is a reactionary. We are reacting to white racism. That's all we're doing. You step on our toe, we scream. We march, we demonstrate. That's reacting. That is not being a racist. Black folk have never learned how to be racist. But as we move into this next century, you better start learning if you're going to survive. Because the other part of racism, the second definition of racism, as I move into these converging issues, the second word is R-A-C-E. That means being in a race. If you and I go outside and get into a race, what does that mean? That means we are in a contest. We are in a contest. That's what it means. And you see, the system has systematically cut black folk out of the contest. They use the word race to say you all cannot be in the contest. And that started in 1638. In 1630, blacks came in this country in 1619, the first 20 blacks. They were here up until 1638. In 1638, when the Maryland colony came into existence, the first act of the Maryland colony in 1638 was to say, we're sick and tired of these 20 blacks who came into the United States in 1619 as servants and now begin to intermix with whites. And we don't like that. So they put out a public edict called a doctrine of exclusion. The doctrine of exclusion says in the future, we want black folk to understand that they would never be permitted to enjoy the fruits of white society. That's called a doctrine of exclusion. And when they push black folk out with the doctrine of exclusion and started setting them up now, because in another 20 years, by 1665, they put out the enslavement laws that started enslaving blacks. But between 1638 and 1666 and 1665, see, they were trying to find somebody to enslave to do the labor. And they went back and expanded that doctrine of exclusions. They took the doctrine of exclusion and says, not only are we going to exclude you people, but we need a labor class. We need somebody who's willing to work free. We need somebody who's willing to work free. Because land has no value. We're going to start playing monopoly. We're going to start playing monopoly in this country. Land has no value. But how do we bring value to the land? We got to have free labor. And so what they started doing all over Europe is advertising, saying anybody now who wants to get rich and play the Monopoly game in America, anybody want to get rich, go to America. I guarantee you come to America, we give you free land and free labor. You would have to be the biggest idiot on earth to come to America and can't get rich. It's when we play this Monopoly game, some people will not be able to play at the table. The guy who's going to use his labor, he won't be able to play. And that's why you never got the 40 acres of mule. They cut you out of the game. Because see, you were to be the wealth maker, not the wealth taker. And the Monopoly game started at that point in time. And black folk never got a chance to participate. Never got a chance to participate as wealth began to be created. Black folk was creating the wealth. Every white person coming to America, when they bought their advertisements in Europe, were granted immediately what we call head rights or homestead acts. Gave out minimum of 640 acres of land to any white one to come into the country. Land had no value. You could walk into America and see whites won't tell you that nowadays. They keep telling you got that money off of land. They didn't. I come to this country right now and say I want to have it owned from here to that mountain and go downtown and file it. You can own any land you can file and hold on to. Land was useless until you put a slave on it. When you put a slave on it, a slave brought 75% of the value to the land. And the only time land ever became more important than a slave, only time it became more important than a slave was after the Civil War. After the Civil War was the first time in the history of this nation that land became more important than a black slave. But see, and that's why when blacks asked for the 40 acres of mule after the Civil War, they said, no. Now land has become too important. Before you all couldn't get it because we had laws that you all were to generate wealth. And now that you all are now useless to us in that respect, because we can't use you as a slave anymore, we still can't give you land because land is more important now. So they changed the rules on you. But then when they found out they still had the land in the South after the Civil War, they still ran another little game on you too, though. They passed the slave codes by 1866. It says, wait a minute, we still can't run these farms in the South unless we got some labor. So they said, how do we re-enslave black folk? So they went back to the 14th Amendment that they just passed to free blacks, and it had a little clause in there that says you cannot, that involuntary servitude, having forcing people to work for nothing in the country was illegal, unless duly having been charged and convicted of a crime. So then what they did, they passed vagrancy laws all over the South. It says that any black person who does not have a contract in his hand by January the 1st of every year, that a white man can pick him up and put him back in slavery. That's how you got blacks back into what they call Jimmy Crow. You know what Jim Crow is? That was Jim Crow slavery. That's how you got our people and your mothers and fathers back into it in the South. Stuck them back in the same thing. Now they never paid them again. They gave the pretense. And said you could go back and we'll call you a sharecropper working for me and I'll keep the books. See, the white man had to keep the books because the black person couldn't read. And they said that to him. They know most of them couldn't read and write in the first place. Why? Because every state had a law saying it was illegal to teach a black man to read and write. It'll cost you $100 and 39 lashes with a whip to be caught teaching a black man to read and write. And the whites knew that. So what they would do then was what the slave code said, now, even though we know you cannot read and write, you better go sign a contract with a white man who can read and write. And he'll tell you what's on it. Now, y'all can figure out that little game, can't you? Now you can figure out why the black man never got paid in the South. Why at the end of every crop season, he owed more at the end than he did before he started out. Because see, whites started a little philosophy called never pay a black man cash, always make him pay on credit in the South. That way he'll never pay off the bill, and never will his children, his grandchildren never pay it off. They set up little shops, little games like this. But my point, I'm deviating from what I want to talk to you about, but I want you to understand the context, that you're locked into a game. And at this day, you got to understand what the game is and start dealing with it straight up and tall, because time is running out. Let me show you how time is running out on you now. We got about 7 converging factors that are going to push us into this underclass structure to keep us as beggars and criminals while the window closes on us. And the window's going to close in about 2 years. 2 years now. I'm not saying 20. You're not hearing me saying 50. You don't hear me saying 80 years from now. I'm saying 2 years from now, you're through as a race in America. Now, in 2 years, here's what's going to happen. One, that what's going to drive us into this underclass, into being beggars and criminals in this country, first thing is this new conservatism in the country. And what you got to understand, every time you hear it on TV or you hear it in the streets, when you hear a white person bragging about it being a conservative, conservatism is a code word for being a racist. That's all it is. It is now a polite way of telling a black person that he's a racist, which means I believe in maintaining that power, wealth relationship over black folk. That's why I want you to understand what racism is. Racism is a power and wealth relationship. So when you talk to a conservative, what he's saying to you, I am totally for maintaining that relationship. Conservatism comes from the root word to conserve. To conserve means to hold on to what you've got. Or as my mother used to say in her 5th grade education, that you who ain't got ain't going to get. That's what conservatism means. So when a white person starts talking about he's a conservative, what he's saying is that whatever the relationship is between whites and blacks, I want it maintained. I want to maintain the status quo. I want no changes. I don't want anything to bip, bop, or move. So they're trying to maintain the relationships. So what has happened after all these centuries of economic exploitation of black folk being denied access to the resources, this monopoly that they've created has made whites in America 50-foot giants and blacks 1-foot midgets. You are 1-foot midgets and they're 50-foot giants. And what they're talking about in conservatism is making sure that relationship stays exactly like it is. Don't let nothing move. And conservatives are the people who are in the force the rules. That's why almost every white now in Congress wants to be a conservative. That's why the whole Republican Party is a new white party for conservatism. What they're talking about doing is making sure that now that we got black folks' hides nailed to the wall, that nothing changes, that they can't get out of it. We got them locked now. We got them locked where we want them. And that's the issue. So now the worst part about that is you're going to have some blacks over there. Now let me tell you now the conservatives want to keep 3 things. 1, he wants to make sure you respect white authority. 2, white principles and values. And 3, that white's superiority. Those are the 3 things that conservatives will keep pushing on you. So you hear them talking about family values. We want to go back to family values. We want to go back to the good old days, the old ways. You keep asking, what old days? What good old ways? When was it good for black folk? But now you'll find that what they're going to do, they're going to pull a few blacks up to represent that perspective for you. Because his primary role is to convince you, that's right, that the good old ways that was good for whites was good for you too. And they'll put out books right now. One guy called D. Sousa. And he has a book called, what is it called? End of Racism. Where his whole book is showing that, saying that black folk got more out of slavery than whites did. And not only did his book say that you got more out of slavery, and you got, what's the black guy from California? Huh? No, he's a conservative too. What's his name? Who? Yeah, I can't, huh? Not Shelby Steele, but anyway, what they're saying, he's saying the same thing that De Sousa is saying. Basically, that black folk got so much out of it that had they not had slavery in America, that black folk would still be in Africa and you'd be worse off. And not only that, but what they're saying is that if you, since whites released you from slavery, that you can no longer have grounds for claiming affirmative action because now, rather than whites owing you, you owe whites for having released you out of slavery. Now, the reasoning behind this is saying that right now, that if I jumped out of this room, you all came out of this cathedral, and I mugged you one night, and I grabbed you and was choking you one night in the alley, and I decided to turn you loose, and you were indebted to me and owed me. Does that make any sense? But this is the kind of garbage that goes on, and this is what's going on in the thinking. And that's why I get upset and I tell them, when I hear my people not thinking, that they're disconnecting. I say, when I preach to you and tell you to watch out what people are selling you. Watch out for the dogs. Watch out for what you're buying into. And every time you have a chance, protest. go to the radio or TV and stop everybody and say, no, you ain't gonna run those dogs past me anymore. So that you understand the issue. And they start talking about this conservatism or whether it's racism, you'll understand those concepts. When you leave here, you'll never let anybody sell you the concept of erroneously about slavery and conservatism anymore, or Jim Crowism. But anyhow, conservatism's primary responsibility is to hold you while we move into this new thing, move into this 21st century, to keep you locked and frozen. The second thing is going to get you is that you got an unending influx of immigrants coming into this country. And the whole point of that influx of immigrants is to do what is done all through history, is to supplant, overshadow you in every respect. They are not coming here to be your friends. They never came here to be your friend. I told you that 10 minutes ago in my speech today, that when you were enslaved, the first thing they did in the 1700s was to advertise all over Europe for any white who wanted to come to this country, that they would guarantee them the good life. They can get free land. That's what that Statue of Liberty is saying. That Statue of Liberty is not for you. At the bottom of it, it says, send me your tired, your poor, yearning to be free. Now, anybody's right mind says that differs with the BS that they keep telling you. Because they keep telling you, well, the immigrants came here because they wanted to work hard. Immigrants didn't come here to work hard. They came here to get easy life. See, if they wanted to work hard, they could have stayed in Europe. They came here because they wanted to get an easy life. Do you really think that all those immigrants pouring into this city in New York right now, they're coming here to work hard? Somebody has sent a message back wherever they're coming from saying, man, go to New York and you can make out. And they come and say, where can I make out best? Go into the black community. Yes, sir. That's the best place to make out, because they are so disorganized, so disunified, so disconnected, so confused. They don't understand the issues. They're so non-competitive. You can eat them for breakfast anytime you want them. Yes, sir. Because their leadership has sold them out and has been selling them out for 400 years. The leadership keeps telling them the wrong thing, keeps telling them what the issues are not. The leadership, the black civil rights order, they're going to tell them that the problems is welfare and food stamps. They're going to tell them that unemployment, drug abuse, crime, public housing, that those are the problems. Those are not the problems. The problem is that your doors are wide open to your communities. And my people haven't got enough common sense to clam the doors shut and say nobody comes into this country, into my communities, and take advantage of black folk anymore. That's what your issue should be. And you got an unending influx of coming in this country. And right now, we anticipate, by the year 2013 as an example, we anticipate 86 million Hispanics in the United States and 43 million Asians. You only got 36 million blacks. They're going to suffocate you to death. Now, earlier in my book, Black Labor, White Wealth, I had projected they would get us by the year 2013. Both groups would have gotten us. The Census Bureau just put out data about 2 months ago. It shortened my projections. And I'm wrong now because they've cut it short. They're now projecting they'll get us way before then. When I wrote that first book, Black Labor, White Wealth, you only had 9% Hispanics in the United States and 12.3% blacks. Now, Hispanics in less than 3 years have gone from 9% up to 11%. We moved from 12.3 to 12.4. They will now get us in 2 years. Now, what does this mean, so you understand these issues before we start talking about economics? That means that you have been the number 2 population in America now for 400 years. You've been number 2. The black race has been number 2. They will pass you in 2 years. Hispanics will get you. That means Hispanics will kick you out of being number 2. You go down to becoming number 3. Asians will get you by the year 205. You will get kicked out of being number 3. You become number 4. Now, anybody who's got more than a 3rd grade education, sitting right here in this cathedral right now, can figure this out. If you didn't get anything after 400 years of being number two, use your imagination and figure out what you're going to get when you become number four. I'm going to tell you how serious it is. You haven't got a snowball's chance if you don't wake up and smell the coffee and start doing something immediately. And they're planning on eating your lunch. They got organizations like the National Hispanic Party, the Council of Salala, they got the Latino Defense League. The first thing in each one of those organizations is to take black folk out, to totally supplant black folk, to change the issue in America from being black and white to white and Hispanic. Because you see, 98% of all the people coming into this country call themselves Hispanics or whites. They have pulled a trick on you. They pull the wool over your eyes, and you owe that credit to your civil rights leaders again. See, the civil rights leaders knew this in the 60s. In the 60s, there's no such thing as a Hispanic. The issue all the way up to the 1960s was black-white, as it had been ever since 1619, for over 400 years. But the Hispanics thought that at the end of the civil rights movement, that black folk may have gotten something out of this whole thing. So what they decided to do was that, say, if black folk go to the table in the 1960s and get something, how do we, as people who speak Spanish, how can we get to the table and get some of what black folk are going to get? Even though we've never suffered like black folk. Nobody's mistreated us. Nobody's shut us out. Nobody's lynched us, castrated us, enslaved us, and Jim Crowed us. But let's pretend that somehow we can get to the table with them and share and sit at the banquet with them. And it's what they did. They created a new race called a Hispanic race. There is no such thing as a Hispanic race. And what they did, they said, well, anybody who speaks Spanish, anybody on earth who speaks Spanish, let's pretend now that we're equal to black folk. And let's call ourselves Hispanics. And that way, whenever black folk go to the table to get something, let's go there with them and say we're equal to them. I don't care whether you're from Nicaragua, El Salvador, Philippines, or from Spain. Pretend you're equal to blacks. And did you hear your civil rights leaders complain? No. They sat there playing those little silly games and allowed black folk to get neutralized and generalized out. And they did the same thing with this whole concept of minority. The whole concept of minority was to neutralize black folk out, to maintain the status quo, make sure nothing changes between whites and blacks and the power and the wealth in this country, in this monopoly game, by saying that let's pretend that everybody's equal to black folk, come up with a new term called minority. There's no such concept as minority before that. So what they did, they threw them all in the pot. And so let's pretend that everybody's equal to blacks. And when our civil rights leaders should have been arguing, trying to correct the problem between blacks and white. I just told you what your two problems were. They should have been saying that you can do nothing until you correct the problem between blacks and whites that have been in existence for 400 years. You must correct the monopoly game. You must correct, whites cannot own 99% of everything, control everything. Black folk leader didn't do it. The black leadership didn't do it. When the white society asked them what they wanted in the 1960s, they said, just give us a little equality and equal opportunity. And the white society said, well, if we gave you equal opportunity, would you blame us? They said, we won't blame you off anything. We'll get beyond blame. Just give us a chance to compete, and we'll outdo you. Now, anybody in his right mind said, how in the world are you going to outdo somebody? They're a 50-foot giant, you're a midget. And what they did, they sold the black race out. And then came up with this little smart saying about, well, we'll just have to run fast and jump higher, instead of correcting the inequities. And it's not just in America. See, right now, the same identical thing is going on in Africa, South Africa. When apartheid was reigning in South Africa, whites in South Africa control 100% of all the gold, the silver, the chrome, the bauxite, the magnesium, the land, the businesses. Everything you know is owned by whites in South Africa. It has been for over almost 130-something years. Now, instead of, when Mandela came into control, instead of saying, what we need to do now is do what? Shift those diamond mines and gold mines and chrome to black folks' hands. They said, well, all we want to do is be free. so we can compete. Compete with what? Now let's think. Compete with what? Use your imagination right now in this auditorium and tell me how in the world can a black South African compete when the same white who's been sitting on the gold mines now, and diamond mines for 150 years, 137 years, still sitting there with it? Somebody's playing games. And they rain the same thing on it. Now, as I told you in this country, blacks didn't get anything. They came out of slavery in the 1860s. They came out of Jim Crow, didn't get anything. And that was a big mistake. Your civil rights leaders, the leadership of this country, blacks and whites, the first thing they should have done was say, before we do anything, before you even start talking about equality, before you start talking about equal opportunity, somebody better go back and find out what has happened to black folk for 500 years. Tell me how badly damaged have black folk been economically, politically, educationally, socially over 500 years. Nobody even cared to go back and find out how they'd been hurt. You've Jim Crowed and enslaved a race of people for 500 years and didn't take the time to find out how they'd been hurt and damaged. When they failed to do that, they couldn't come up with a bill. They didn't send a bill. And that's why whites now don't feel they owe you anything. If I damage your Mercedes and tore up your car in a wreck out in front of this building, somebody needs to go back and send that car to the shop and ascertain what the damage is. They never did it. All our civil rights leaders said in the 60s, well, we all a happy family now. Let's pretend your car is okay. Yes, I just ran over your car with a truck, but in a Mercedes, but let's be friends and let's all go on our merry way. Your car is still sitting there squashed. You all understand what I'm saying to you? And see, and now here my people sit in the country and got all the racist organizations running around the country saying, well, those black folk, there's something wrong with them genetically. That's why the bell curve, this DeSouza's book coming out. Because, see, nobody ever did a study to find out what had happened to black folk. That's why I have the Harvest Institute now up in Washington, D.C., trying to ascertain what has happened to my people so I can start sending a bill to the white society. Say, no, I don't want any equality. I don't want any equal opportunity. My people aren't ready for it. Not until you correct the problems first, just like you did with everybody else. You correct the damage, you repair what you've done, then we'll talk about equality and equal opportunity. Don't cripple my people, break their legs, break their arms, blind them, knock out to break their neck and say, let's have a foot race. And even now, so President Clinton's coming out with his new thing, all those black leaders are going to talk about the same old game. They're going to get with Clinton and say, well, what black folk need is more jobs, more food stamps. And I'm going to tell you why all that's a waste of time. Black folk don't need jobs. Black folk need money in a monopoly game. You've had full-time employment ever since you were slaves. Only thing a job would do is keep you one paycheck away from starvation and unemployment. And I go around this country and I come into New York and I say, why do blacks in New York still let people sell them an empowerment zone which will give them jobs and give white folks wealth and money to play the game of Monopoly? I said, now somebody's elevator's not going to the first floor. And I said, why would New York let somebody set up an empowerment zone just to give black folks jobs? When I told you you're in a monopoly game, you said, no, you give black folks the money and wealth, let us give white folks some jobs. Say for once in 400 years or 500 years, let whites work for blacks. Tell them you want to be job makers, not job takers. So that's the second thing, is this unending influx of immigrants. It's going to push us down. They're going to take us out. And they know that. So that's why the Wall Street Journal right here in New York, about 2 months ago, on the left-hand side of the paper says that the political structure is always gearing up, that as soon as they overcome black folk, nobody's going to talk to black folk about anything anymore. When they want to get answers, they will go to the Hispanics. And everything that you all are going to need in the future, you will only get it coming through Hispanics. Now, if you want to find out what that's going to look like, go down to Miami today. And in Miami, blacks down there are totally shut down and shut out of the system. Where they've taken over all the cleaning women's jobs on the hotels on the beach. And I got 2 black cleaning women saying, Dr. Anderson, we're going to the Supreme Court and sue because we can't even get jobs in Florida anymore because the Hispanics control everything in South Florida, and they say nothing goes to anybody unless it comes through Hispanics. They control the government and all the businesses. And they changed all the street signs even in the Spanish. And they said, if you don't speak Spanish, you get nothing. And I'll say to myself, don't you all want to learn English? They said, no, we don't want to learn English. We don't need to learn English. We're in control. If you want to get along in Dade County, you learn Spanish. You see, and our people are not that bright. See, instead of our people learn how to play the game, like in this whole issue with Ebonics, for instance, they chastise our black kids, same civil rights leaders. Who got the audacity talking about black kids should let black kids speak Ebonics and black English? That's terrible. Now, see, that's only said about black folk. You see what I'm saying? And see, it's only said because if you said, no, in our community, if we own and control our own communities, we don't care what black kids speak. See, white folk are upset with black kids speaking what we call black dialect because they want you to purify yourselves so you can, when you come into their community, they want you to speak something that reflects and honors them, their language. But see, they don't tell the Cubans that down in Miami. But I'm going to find Cubans in Miami that can't speak a word of English and say they're never going to learn Spanish. I mean, English. Yo te digo en a minute, no habla español. No habla inglés. Poquito es inglés. See, they don't want to learn. They don't want to learn anything. They said, because in my neighborhood, you're going to come on my turf and learn my language. And see, if we'd have had some respect for our children, we'd be protecting them and saying, as long as our kids can stay in their neighborhood, the whole point of any language is to communicate. As long as people understand what you're talking about, there is no good language and bad language. All language is good as long as it communicates. And you got to also understand that language is an index of culture. You allow somebody to put the bad mouth on your language, they're putting the bad mouth on the people that language represents. So now let me get to the next point. Next point that's going to drive us into this thing going to be technology. Technology is not your friend. I don't care who tells you that. I know okay? I always hear people telling me, I come in all the time and say, oh man, you get a computer in your house, you can overcome racism. Don't you buy it? Don't you believe that? A computer is nothing but a tool. Just like any other tool. There's very little difference between a computer and a hammer. It had been 100 years ago. If you're going to get a computer or technology, you must have something to use it for. You hear people telling you about, well, we got the internet. Let's get on the information highway. Get on the information highway and go where? The information highway and the internet is a transportation system for transporting something. Maybe this time it's information. When they created the highway for trucking, when they created the airlines, when they created the shipping, did that help black folk? No. You know why? Because black folk didn't own it. Black folk hadn't owned the airlines and the shipping yards. So letting people tell you about, well, you get on the information highway, you can't beat nothing unless you own something. You got to own and control to be competitive. Technology has always been black folks' enemy. Why? Because you see, now there's some good things in technology. I'm not putting technology down now. But technology has hurt us for a very simple reason, because of racism. Racism has always kept us in our place, and technology has always come along and wiped that place out. That's what hurts us. Racism holds us down, technology runs over us. So that way we are always one step ahead of it. We'll be the blacksmith putting the shoes on the horses until the cars are invented. We'll be the dishwasher until we get an electric dishwasher. We'll be the door opener until we get an electric guy to open the doors. Don't anybody tell you about technology a friend of black folks. It's never been a friend of black folks. Because we don't have the wealth to be able to develop the technology. We don't have the wealth to be able to develop the resources to be able to use technology. What we got to learn how to do is get enough wealth and power to get behind technology and get out from in front of it. It keeps running over us. That's why the Office of Information and Technology in Washington says that black folk are going to be devastated in the future by technology. That's why I've got named Jeremy Ripken, the director for Internet Economic Trends in Washington, D.C., that programs all of our politicians, put out a book called The End of Work. And in that book, The End of Work, chapter 5 is only about black folk, as an example. And he said, and he kept that in there because his publishers wanted him to take it out. He said, I'm not going to take it out of this book because I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Technology is going to kill black folk. He has a whole section in his book, and I went and talked with him about it. He said they haven't got a snowball's chance because right now they don't own and control enough technology. And therefore, technology is our enemy until we own it and control it. And the fourth thing that'll get you is this whole business now, all this downsizing and privatizing you see going on in government. Those are really code words for eliminating black folk now that black folk are obsolete. Because you see what they found out now is that about 68 to 70% of all the black people in America, as a direct result of the end of the civil rights movement, moved into government service. And they're planning on closing down those jobs now. That's right. And see, because we're an obsolete people. We've been an obsolete people ever since the mid-1960s. Technology caught up with us. Technology has been our enemy. It caught up with us in the mid-1960s, right in the middle of the civil rights movement. Now let me back about 50 years to show you how technology got you. Let's go back to 1920. In 1920, for example, about 90% of all the black people in America were still doing the same thing they've been doing 300 years before that. Did you all know that? They were still working in the fields in the South, picking cotton. 90% of the blacks in America, 90% of all the blacks in America in 1920 were still doing the same thing that their parents had been doing 300 years before that, picking cotton in the South. But when the blacks came back after World War I, some of those blacks came back, they got a little uppity. They didn't want to take any more of that abuse in the South. So in 1920, they had what's known as the Red Summer. A lot of those blacks brought back some weapons and they fought back. The whites slaughtered a lot of them across America because there wasn't enough of them armed, enough of them committed up here to fight back. But that was the first time in the history of this nation that blacks stood up to whites. It was those black soldiers that came back after World War I. You had massive race riots in America. But those blacks in the South, though, says, hey, because of Woodrow Wilson's negative attitude about protecting us, and whites are getting hostile now that black folk are getting a little uppity, we're going to start getting out of the South. So whites down in the South, at that time in 1920, started poisoning blacks' animals on those farms. They burned their crops, poured kerosene on the cotton, and started running blacks out of the South. We had a massive move for blacks out of the South heading north from about 1920 up to about 1950s. Now, when that started happening, white folks says, well, these blacks are leaving. We don't need them anymore right now in the South. We got to get something to replace them. I'm going to show you how technology works. So they went and started working on developing a cotton picking machine. And by 1946, 47, they had perfected the cotton picking machine. Where a black could pick 50 pounds of cotton an hour, that machine could pick 1,000 pounds of cotton an hour. And black folk then by 1947 were obsolete in the South. Obsolete. They no longer needed you for nothing in the South. Go down there right now, you still see them out obsolete, standing around on the street corners. Even those blacks that own land, not growing nothing but weeds and snakes and bushes on it. They became obsolete. But the few blacks that moved up north, they did very well from about 1950s up until about 1965 in the factories. They moved into the steel mills, chemical plants, automobile plants, meat packing plants, and did very well. Became middle class, got good incomes. In the middle of the civil rights movement in 1956, they became obsolete. When Martin Luther King was saying, free at last, he was not talking about black folk. He was talking about whites. Whites no longer needed you for your labor. You became obsolete. And from that point on, then, they said the whole policy on black folk is that black folk are obsolete in this country. As whites, we got to figure out what we're going to do with them now. We no longer need them. We got a choice. What do we do with them? Now, remember what the problem is. The problem is that by that time, in 1956, you got two problems now. You got whites now who got a monopoly of wealth, power, control of wealth, power, resources, businesses, and everything. They control 98 to 99% of all the wealth and power in America. Blacks don't control anything. You're now obsolete. The second problem we got is that we've been conditioned to respond incorrectly to everything that goes down. They've taught us through the system, socially, through social engineering, to always do everything backwards and upside down and against our best interests. And so whites say we got them where we want them. So let's get to some of the things we have to do. So they came to this whole concept of minority. The whole concept of minority was to always confuse black folk and defuse the resources, which means confuse the issue. Anytime you got something that pertains to black folk, try to add any other thing to it to make sure that black folk never stand alone so they'll ever get anything. So that way you never have to distribute anything to them. That's right. Then that's the whole point of Title IX came in with the women's thing. Mix anything in, called generalize everything to make it equal to black folk. Pretend that all people, that everything is equal. And that's why every time you read something in the paper about black folk, by the end of that conversation, they're going to switch it over to where it talks about minorities. Or talk about poor folk, or disadvantaged, or anything. Don't let people sell that to you anymore. You tell them, say, if black folk got a problem, the darn solution better be to black folk. Don't start mixing with any women, any gender issues, any handicap, gays, anything else. And that's what the president's going to run on you again. That's why the problem never changes in America. They take black folk have a unique experience in America. And the minute you allow them to equate you to other people, you just got rid of your own uniqueness. You just lost your justification for reparations in America. You just said that nothing has happened to black folk that was important in America. The minute you let them tie you in with another group. And you tell them that nobody in America has had an experience similar to ours. Nobody has suffered the way we have, been denied and excluded. Hispanics, I told you Hispanics is a fabricated race. There is no such thing as Hispanics. That's only white people speaking Spanish. What you got to say is that before you started putting me into a minority set-aside program with Hispanics, you show me one single solitary instance in the United States history where anybody has customarily and legally excluded people speaking Spanish. You show me where they've been castrating and lynching people because they spoke Spanish. And you stop it. You stop it when you start leaving this place today. Nobody let you put you in a minority category for any reason. Don't let them call you a minority. Because you see, the word minority in a capitalistic society, in a social democracy, means loser. It means loser. Because you live in a social democracy that says the majority will win and enjoy life, the loser will suffer and lose. And once you started calling yourself a minority, you started calling yourself a loser. And once you start doing it, you create a negative mindset in the minds of your own children. But even worse than putting in a negative mindset as a loser in the minds of your children, you put it into the mindsets of your adult leadership. And they become paralyzed and crippled. And so even when they become the majority, they don't know that they're the majority, don't know how to practice the majority politics. When I go into cities where black folk are the majority population, and I see them sitting there working on a program for minorities. I go into Detroit, Michigan, where they got an 84% black population. And I asked the city council, what are you doing for black folk in this city? They said, we got an office of minority business. Why would you have a city that's 84% black set up an office of minority business for black folk? You are the majority. I said, somebody should be in prison in this town. When you got policies there, you got programs that says that 95% of the contracts go to the majority, why are you giving it to whites when you're the majority? I go into Washington, D.C. with 77% black population. Why are the whites there getting 97% of the services and goods? That is illegal. You leave this auditorium today and go out and start suing some people. You got the Richmond decision, Supreme Court decision. The Richmond and Hobbs decision that says you cannot bypass a majority to give to a minority. How are you justifying bypassing all these black majorities in these cities? Then worse than that, nobody yet. Just like I told you that during the civil rights movement, that they failed to do one of the critical things that's crippled black folk, and I hate it that it happened. They never once did a survey to find out what happened to black folk in 400 years of slavery. That's the first thing they should have done in the civil rights movement. And that's why our leadership should be right now should be called to task for that. How can you talk about equality and equal opportunity without having figured out how black folk have been damaged? You never did that. Right now today, how can you go into a city and start writing services and goods and not find out and decide who is the majority and who's the minority? That issue never comes up. So whites in the suburbs, where they're the majority, they win everything. They come into a black city, they win everything. Because nobody says, well, in this city, no, you're the minority. But see, Cubans do. You go down to Miami, and the Cubans will tell you right now, we got 800,000 registered voters. We are the majority here. We win every time. You get nothing in this city unless you come through us. I go to a black city, it's just the opposite. It calls another concept called integration. See, we are the only group in this country that keeps pursuing integration, because we got shot out of the tube in 1638 with that doctrine of exclusion that says that black people should never be permitted to enjoy the fruits of white society. We started at that point pursuing integration and never stopped. We are fanatic about integration. Black folk would kill you to get hold of integration. Ever since 1638, they've thought that white folks' ice was colder. They'll run over you, do anything in the world to get to integration. When anybody knows anything about human dynamics and about the structure of racism, the dynamics of racism will tell you integration will kill you. You're going backwards. The worst thing that black folk need is integration. In a pluralistic society, power and group wealth is what the key to your survival. Integration means disintegration. When any other group comes to this country, they come in from from Asia. Well, I don't care whether they're Vietnamese, Cambodians, Koreans, Chinese. The first thing they say when they leave their country, look in the mirror and say, when I get to America, the first thing they're going to do, I'm going to find me a community of people that look like me. I'm going to build me a community of people that look like me. So that I go out west, I'll find little Cambodians, little Koreas. I'll find little Vietnams. I'll find Chinatowns in every city in America. The Hispanics are coming to this country, and they do the same thing. You'll find little Mexicos, little Havanas, little Hialeah, Floridas. I can go any place in America, and I can find Chinatowns, French town, German town, Greek town, but I can't find a black town. Because only my people keep going backwards. And they're killing me and all the rest of the black folk in the country. And you got your civil rights leaders keep preaching integration. They know you can't make it with integration. Why can't you make it with integration? Because now, as we go into the 21st century, it's pluralism. The new issue must be pluralism, which means together as a group. That's the only way you can amass power and wealth, is as a group. There is no such thing as individual power and wealth that has any importance in a pluralistic society. You got to learn how to pool. And that means that you must have something then that those groups are developing. You must have a community. You must have a community. I jokingly, when I kicked off my speech saying, what I like to have is a 2x4 with a nail in it. I was telling the fellow in the back room, because if I could go around New York, I can rebuild New York for black folk. Give me a 2x4, put the nail in the end, put some barbed wire around it. And I can catch every black in this city. I'll run him into a black neighborhood and lock it up and lock the gate on it. And catch any black I catch leaving it, spending $1 out, I'll tear him up. Because why? Because you see, he is doing something that's hurting me. As a black person, you don't have the right to keep doing wrong. 98% of what black people are doing in America, they're doing it wrong. They can't even do wrong right. Because you see, in a society like this, I don't care what you think, God assigned us arbitrarily to a skin color team. If my team loses, I lose. You all understand what I'm saying? Yes, sir. And people say, Doctor, why are you so concerned about black folk? If my team loses, I've lost anyway. You then have to go back and rebuild your communities. And you got to pull back and start building fences around your community. Other people are going to invade your communities because they're coming after it. They're going to play called, we got it, ours, we're going to get yours. Integration makes you a guest. It makes you a guest in something that's owned by someone else. You're going to be a guest in their communities, in their neighborhoods, on their buses, in their hotels, in their airlines. You're going to be a guest. And while you're being a guest in those suburbs, those blacks that move to the suburbs, you're a guest out there. The other groups will come in and take over your old neighborhoods and make you a guest in your old neighborhoods. I'm telling you, you got less than 2 years for the Hispanics to make you a guest in America, and Asians will make you a guest by the year 2005. That way you're going to have no place to go. If you have not dealt with white racism in 400 years, God knows you ain't going to be able to deal with these other two coming. You haven't resolved the first one. You better run like all hell to get back to your own communities and come together as a group and rebuild those communities. Set up your own alternative economic structure. That means you must build your own industries in there, your own businesses. Those businesses must be vertical. What do I mean by an alternative economic structure? Chinatown is an alternative economic structure. Little Hialeah, Havana, Little Italy, those are alternative economic structures. See, if you don't have a community, you cannot go in business. And I tell blacks all over America, whether I was with the Department of Commerce, with government, international politics, local politics, even when I was the chairman of a board of governors, I'll tell black folk this, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. And I'll take on any black that tells me any difference. Do not go into business until you start building communities. If you go into business right now, 80% of all blacks that go into business today will be bankrupted in 2 years. You can't make it. You can't make it if you don't have a community. Why can't you make it? Because without a community, you have no what, people? You have no, one more thing. No, not quite that yet. You have no market. If you have, in other words, you understand what I'm saying? If you don't have a community, you have no market. And if you don't have a market, how are people going to find you? People are going to come by your store at 200 miles an hour trying to get to the shopping mall in somebody else's community because you're not congregated and aggregated. And see, don't think the other group's going to buy from you. We just got through with Chinatown, where blacks down there, with George Fraser and his people went over to Chinatown in Washington, D.C., and asked some of the white Chinese merchants, said, why don't you buy some products from us since you're in a black town here, right outside the black town, in Chinatown. Buy from us. We can sell you some of that same products you got on your shelves, 25 to 30% cheaper than you're currently paying for it. Buy it from black folk. And the North Koreans and Chinese said, no, we don't want to do that. They said, even if we sell it to you for 25 to 30% cheaper, you still won't buy it? They said, sir, you all don't understand the point. They said, what's the point? The point is, they said, is that it ain't the price. It ain't the money. Just that we don't buy from anybody but our own people. You see, I can't get that through to my people's head. My people are so slow right here, they can't even figure that out. I said, why don't you play the same game and only buy from your people? Build your own communities and buy from your own people. So what we do, right now, we're about the 9th richest nation on earth with an annual disposable income of somewhere around $382 billion. We spend 95% of that outside our communities. 95% goes right into the white community. Your money is supposed to bounce 8 to 12 times before it leaves your community. Black money does not bounce one time. As soon as a black person gets paid here in New York City, he's going to run right to a white store and a white mall and spend it. He commits suicide, and he walks in there wanting to feel guilty. Every time you pull your money out of your pocket, you should say, is this money going to a white hand or a black hand? And they spend it, and every time you do it, you commit suicide. You spend 95% of your money in the white community. Then you could turn around and go back to your own black community, spend another 3% of that in non-black owned businesses in your community, in the hands of Chinese and Hispanics in your community. We only keep 2% of our money in our own hands. Then we put that in a white bank, and now you're bankrupt because they won't even give you a loan. Nobody else does this but us. Nobody else would do it but us. Now, why? And one of the fascinating things is when I go to small towns all over the United States, invariably people say, Dr. Anderson, now you're in town. If you got a spare moment, we'll take you around and show you some of the nice homes in our neighborhoods. They take me out and show me the white neighborhoods, the white homes, big fine homes, mansions. And invariably they ask me, Dr. Anderson, how can white folks afford all these big nice homes and mansions and where do you get all the money from? I say, it's easy. It's your money. They're living off of two incomes. See, whites live off of two incomes. They live off 100% of their money and 95% of blacks. Because blacks don't understand basic economics. They don't understand group politics and group economics. Everybody on earth understands group economics but my people. Because we keep buying the dog that won't hunt. We keep getting sold this business about the whites keep telling you about individualism. They can talk about individualism for a very specific purpose because they've never been the victim of racism and cannot be the victim of racism. So they can be individuals. But you cannot have individualism and racism on the same table. Racism runs over and eliminates individualism. As long as racism exists, black folk never mention anything about individualism. You are being perceived and treated as a group. You must spend your money. You must keep your money in your community. And even Jews have figured this out. Jews don't talk about individualism. They don't talk about groupism. For that reason, money stays in a Jewish community and bounces 18 times before it leaves. And so in your communities up here, you got to start closing the doors and shutting off. Because everybody's going to come into your communities for one reason, because they know they have no competition to come to your communities. 2, because it's wide open. 3, because they can sell shabby merchandise. And 4, they can control your politicians by coming in your communities. You got to start saying, this is our community. No money is leaving out here. Nobody's going to come in and suck money out of our communities. You are in a fight for your survivalship. And as I said, the window of opportunity is going to close in 2 years. And nobody's going to tell you that. And whenever you hear your civil rights leaders and your whites talking, they're going to talk in ambiguous terms about minorities, poor folk, disadvantaged people, culturally pride, multiculturalism. Jesse would talk about the Rainbow Coalition. In the Urban League will talk about multicultural, culturally diverse. NWCB will talk about minorities. I can't find anybody who wants to talk about black folk, because nobody wants to be black. Even Tiger Woods doesn't want to be black. But you better start talking about black folk. And don't let them mix you in any of these groups. The next thing you must do, that must also effectuate your politics. Practice group politics. Always practice group politics. That means quid pro quo. Politics is a process that decides who can get what benefits out of life. Be honest with you. And it's based on quid pro quo. Never elect anybody to office. I don't care what his color is, red, green, yellow, purple. Never put anybody in office unless first he signs a contract with the black community about what he's going to do specifically to the black and for the black community, not for an individual. Don't let them keep selling you this dog that won't hunt about if I get elected, what I'll do is that I'll give you good government, or I'll hire a black secretary or a black receptionist. I'll give some black person a job. See, Clinton will tell you about how he's going to get some black person put in his cabinet. Who cares? I don't care about who Clinton puts in his cabinet. I don't care whether he has a black secretary of transportation or a black over commerce. Who cares? What you must be concerned about is what kind of resources will come out of that government back to my people. I don't care whether a white person is sending it down to my people or a yellow person sending it. As a matter of fact, if nobody's going to send it, I'd rather have a non-black there so I know who to go after. But we the only people on earth that never practice quid pro quo in politics, which means you get something back for whatever you deliver. If you're going to play politics, play to win, which means that if we vote for you and put you in office, you owe us. You owe us. You owe this community. And we want to know in very tangible, specific terms, what are you going to do for our community for us putting you in office? I don't care whether it's a city, a mayor, anyone else. And if you don't do that, you must start holding people accountable. And the best way to hold them all accountable is for every black in America to pull out of every party. Get out of the Republican Party, get out of the Democratic Party, become independent. If you really want to scare this country to death, let every black in America become independent. You'll get their attention. Because see, now they no longer have you nailed to the wall. Because see, the issue never was what party a black person belonged to. See, when blacks were enslaved, they didn't belong to any party. From 1866 to 1936, it belonged to the Republican Party. From 1936 to 1996, it belonged to the Democratic Party. And each time they got messed over. So it's not what party you belong to, it's whether or not you know how to play the game, to hold people accountable and get your returns for voting and playing the game. And we don't, people don't understand the game. You start to hold them accountable. Go independent. And then set up an accountability system and saying, I don't care if you don't take care of me when you get in office. 1, what we're going to do is we're going to recall you. 2, we're going to hold public referendums all the time to go bypass you, to pass our own laws like California does. Or 3, if you don't deliver to the black community, we'll start boycotting everybody who puts you in office. If you got money from Burger King to get in office, we'll start boycotting Burger King. Then 4thly, you start creating a black independent party in America. So that half your blacks registered. And then you start playing like the Jews play. Right now, Jews make up 3% of the population of America. But they vote at an equivalent level of 9%. They have a weight, a strength of 9% because they vote in such large numbers. Now, black folk can do the same thing. So when we got a Republican Party, a Democratic Party, and Ross Perot Party, you got three parties. That means the white vote is split three times. You create a black independent party in America. Now you can play the game. And then you vote at the same strength the Jews vote. With a 12.3% population, you maximize your strength three times. You can carry 38%. You can win the election then. You can take the White House. And you tell whites when they ask you how you black folk going to vote, you hold your vote. So we're never going to tell you how we vote. We're independent. We won't tell anybody how we're going to vote until 2 hours before the polls close. We're going to fall like a brick on everybody. I guarantee you every white in the country running around saying, what do you think those black folk want? So, I mean, and I know my time is probably up. Let me take a few questions. Yes, Rev. No, and see that's why I need people like you, and because I know where your heart and your commitment is, and that's what the Harvest Institute is about. Nobody's ever done that, and consequently, that puts us at a decided disadvantage. You see, to pretend, Rev, that we've never hurt. Now we're going to try to get to that. That's what we got a convention coming up, which I'm going to talk about next year. We're going to move into that. We're going to start doing a national survey to find out, going back through every record, to show how black folk have been educationally, emotionally, psychologically, politically, and economically damaged by 450 years of mistreatment, abuse, castration, exploitation, and everything else. And then we're going to send a bill to the white society. And since we never done that, that's why Jews right now, that's why Jews have gotten $52 billion just from being interned for a little over 10 years during World War II. That's why Indians right now, that's why Indians still have treaties. Indians are still getting reparations. Indians get reparations every year. The federal government's Indian Bureau puts in $27,000 a year for every Indian in the United States. That's why they just got to redoing the treaties again. That's why out of 200 tribes in the United States, they got over 237 gambling casinos, where each one is bringing in something like about $60,000 to $70,000 almost a day for the Indians, per Indian. So everybody. Then I got the whites got indentured servants. They got paid what they call freedom dues. The Japanese getting doing internment. They were nobody did anything to them, just relocated them and inconvenienced them for 3 years. They got $20,000 apiece. Under the Marshall Plan, Germany now, they went to war and lost the war. And they got $13 billion into the Marshall Plan. In Japan, they lost the war. They got $14 billion under the Point 4 Plan. The only people that's been mistreated for centuries and never got a penny of black folk. And they said, well, they ain't going to give us anything. Who cares? You go fight for it. Don't let anybody mistreat you and you keep talking, well, excusing and behavior. And they said, well, Dr. Anderson, now I hear whites saying, well, Dr. Anderson, well, my grandfather, lynched and castrated all those people. It wasn't me. That's fine. I said, but you enjoying the fruits of what he did. You see, in other words, if you inherited his house and there's a mortgage on that house, you're going to pay that mortgage to get out of it, one of the two. You see, in other words, you're enjoying the advantages of being white skin, and I'm suffering the disadvantage of being black, with black skin, because of what happened to my people. Somebody's going to carry the burden. They said, well, I don't see why I should be paying to follow that point. I said, well, let me tell you something then. As an example, black people right now did not start the war in Germany, but we paid a lot of that money that went into the Marshall Plan. We didn't start the war with Japan, but black folk paid the money that Japan got. That $20,000 that the Japanese just got 3 years ago, black people put in a lot of that money. We didn't do it. Right now, all the money the Indians are getting all around this country every year, black people didn't take the land from the Indians, but we're still paying it. The whites stole $750 billion out of the S&Ls. Now every black person in America got to pay $2,000 a year for the next 20 years to pay it back. We didn't steal the money, but we're paying it. So consequently, I don't care what white folks say. You're still here. You're a part of society. You enjoy the advantage. You pay for it. And I tell black folks, you started sending a bill to them. And right now, we got no choice, because right now, in 2 years, the door's going to close, slam shut on us. But I cannot get some of our water-leg civil rights leaders to understand they got an obligation to their people to say the same thing. We got some Hispanics right now, not some Hispanics, but Japanese that went down to Latin America in World War II. They're now coming back to the United States, want reparations. And what I'm saying is that our civil rights leaders are so enamored of being respected by whites, accepted by whites, that they will not fight for their own people, even though they see their people going down the back steps backwards, not coming out. And so, Reverend, right now, I don't see how we're going to make it as a black race. We're going backwards now. Things are getting worse for us, and I cannot get black civil rights leaders to do anything, and everybody keeps telling me it's not because they cannot disengage themselves from white money. Oh, God.
All right, no, and I'm serious. I'm serious. Now, I'm going to be a man straight up because you were here, you impressed us. We said we were going to do some stuff. That was at least 3-4 years ago. We ain't done nothing. Now we're bringing you back again. You know, I'm surprised you accepted it because we didn't do shit the last time. So you know, and therefore we fit into the kind of stuff that you're talking about. Now, this whole business of a ministry to African American men, it means to me, if we're going to bring people in like you, that we craft the kind of agenda that you are talking about, that we don't just form a great choir.
Right.
You know, that we have an agenda that will not hold inside of these doors. Come on in, do the holy dance. Come on in, sing in the choir. Come on in and support the preacher. But the issue is, what is the church agenda?
Good, fantastic. Let me react. Hold right. Let me react to that. Now, first of all, I got to apologize to Johnny, because, Reverend rather than call him Johnny, because I brag about him a lot in the country, and I have never had his permission to brag about him. But whenever he asked me about some of our strongest supporters in the country, I fib a lot on that. I said, Johnny, you're one of our best supporters, and he is, and his heart is in the right place. And we got some things coming up next year that I want you to be involved. We got a national convention coming up on June the 19th next year in Los Angeles, and we're pulling together all of our ministers now in the country to help us with it, and we're going to lay a new platform, a new foundation in America. It's going right down the center of the road. We're going to run right over these civil rights leaders and everybody else. We're going to lay a political, economic foundation for black folk in this country. Let me show you some of the things we're doing to answer your question, and I'm sorry to hear that you all didn't do anything since we left last year, but I want you all to come up with a project, and I'm going to work very closely with Rev to work on this. As an example, down in New Orleans. In New Orleans, I went down there and asked all the blacks to meet me at Reverend. So they showed me around. They said, Dr. Anderson, they said, you know, our poverty rate here is 80%. That means 80% of the blacks in New Orleans right now beneath the poverty line. Can't hardly make ends meet. 80%. And that city is one of the wealthiest cities in this country. Got all these gambling casinos. And they said, can you help us? So I organized all the little community agencies. They came out and put up the little paper plates. They took me around and rented a bus. And they said, what can you do to help us? I said, you must always go from your strength. I said, we should have a black tourism district in America. I said, you all have the background to do it. It's identified with New Orleans. And I said, and why this is important to me, because I just left Hawaii. And in Hawaii, I got there, and they took me off the plane. I went to meet some blacks. They were going to try to raise some money for them. They took me around and sort of sucked me into the Hawaiian culture. They had the luau's and the music, and they took me in the hills and trains in the Hawaiian village. They smother you in the culture. I left there and flew to what island was that? No, that wasn't the Bahamas. Wasn't Barbados. Bermuda, to Bermuda. Got to Bermuda, and the blacks asked me to help them over there, and about 1,200 blacks at the airport. And they said, we need some help over here for starting our programs. And I said, first of all, where's the black community? They said, we don't have that, sir. I said, what you mean? And they walked out, they said, we just, every place they took me was white. And so all of a sudden I found out here they are in an area that's 6 to 7% black in Bermuda. All of them walking around with Bermuda shorts on, trying to be British. I said, well, where's your culture? I said, where's your industry? And they said, well, I said, no. I said, you're playing silly games here. I said, put me back on the plane. I said, in other words, if you haven't got enough sense to figure out that people, who you are, when people come to Bermuda, they're coming there to see some culture. They're coming there to see something historic about black folk. You have no industries built around it. There you go, all you got is trying to show off whiteness, the yacht clubs. And so when I went down to New Orleans, I said, what we do here is to build a black tourism industry. So I've gone over there now, we identified 3 blocks of land, and we got in possession of it now. And as soon as I got possession of the title of the property, every day whites are running over there now trying to buy the property off from under. Now here's a black neighborhood nobody's touched in 30 years, run down, abandoned. And these black folks, the doctor has no white would not come near us talking about it. So you're the only person that's cared about us in 30 years. So we're going to build up a tourism district. I'm putting in nightclubs there, and the blacks going to own them. They pitching in their monies and their dollars and their pennies. We're putting in nightclubs. We're putting in about 3 nightclubs. We're putting in 3 or 4 different kind of restaurants. We're putting in a cultural center there, in a 3-story building, the Hamlin building. We're putting in some ice cream parlors, souvenir shops, and everything else. We're going to compete with the French Quarters there. And we're going to eventually get a hotel there. And until we get a hotel, I'm starting a small black mini bus line that will go around to all the hotels and pick up the blacks and whites and bring them to the black neighborhood to bring money in. The thing I tell black folk is bring money into your community. Let nobody take it out. Keep your money in your community. And that's what I'm after. So they're doing that in New Orleans. In Cincinnati, I got blacks there buying 2 shopping centers that used to belong to whites in the black neighborhoods. We're going to buy them out and take them over and keep money there and put in our own businesses. In Philadelphia now, what they want to do is get into the utility business. So I'm trying to get blacks now to start brokering utilities and control electric services and start selling electric services to blacks in their own neighborhoods. We're building our own seafood restaurants. And I got, so you're familiar with that. And so I got blacks raising ponds. I got Tuskegee University, Southern University, Florida A&M, Prairie View. I got all the black consortium now taking black land, showing them how to raise wheats and corn and soybean to feed fish. Then I got the rest of them raising seafood ponds, raising the fish, tilapia, bass, trout, and selling it for restaurants all over America now. So I'm trying to get blacks in every area to start something. Now, I would love to have something out of the church, and when I come back next time, you all got to have a project, and I even have to help you get it. That's why I said to you initially, do not walk out of this cathedral today and tell me you're not doing the damn thing anymore, because I'm not going to do it. I'm going to get me a 2x4 and I'm coming back. Okay? Yes, sir.
I heard you up in Harlem about 4 or 5 months ago. Could you give them a breakdown on Fish City? I think something that could work.
Okay, the Fish City restaurant with Bob Law, the night talk show, has been raised starting investment clubs here for you all to buy into the businesses. We're starting, all Fish City is identifying, taking the little bit of resources blacks have, taking the land and converting them to seafood ponds. But typically, as an example, to make it a long story short, typically I can pull tilapia, which is a fast-growing fish. About every 3 months, I can pull a tilapia, 1 to 1.5 pound fish out of a pond at a cost of about 55 cents a pound. I can pull catfish out about 79 cents a pound. That farmer then makes money out of raising that fish, okay, that on land he was heretofore not using. That then goes up to the next level. We're trying to buy a processing plant in Jacksonville, Florida, where we're going to slice, dice, and prepare all of our own foods and ship it all over the country. We even got people like Denzel Washington and Felicia Richard in their restaurant in California. We'll buy some of your seafood and stuff. We're going to process our own seafood. Then we go up to the next level, and we're going to send that seafood to blacks who want to own restaurants, fast food restaurants. We did a couple of prototype stores in Florida. We put them next door to Burger King and McDonald's. Those seafood stores on our little soul food mixed menu, drive-through, outsold Burger King and McDonald's 2-to-1. Where McDonald's and Burger King were doing about $800,000 a year in store business, we did $1.5 million per store. So we're going to start our own seafood restaurants, some sit-down restaurants, some drive-through, also institutional sales and fresh seafood markets. We walk in and get it. And the waste product goes up at the fourth level into what we call a fertilizer plant. We mix that with vegetables and with vegetation, and put a black into the fertilizing business. Then we take that fertilizer and ship it over to a hydroponic gardening place where we raise our own vegetables inside black cities. I'm going into black cities like Detroit, Michigan, and we find old abandoned warehouses and old schools, and have them gutting them and building troughs and raising vegetables right inside the ghetto, so blacks will never even have to leave the city to get their own food anymore. Why is that important? Because right now 75% of all the blacks in America live in 10 large cities, and I can starve them to death in 8 days because they can't get food anymore. Because right now whites can cut the food off and they're through. So what I'm trying to do is make sure they can raise their food in their own communities and set up their own. So we set up hydroponic plants and facilities for raising their own foods. So a lot of things we're working on, so I just need you all to be involved in some things, and that's why I need the good Rev. I know where his heart is, and I brag about him all over the country when they ask me about ministers, and about all the 30 or 40 ministers, he is always one of the first ones I name. Yes. Let me stop you right there and let you finish. Let me deal with a couple of points and let you finish, okay? First of all, I hear that quite often when people say blacks, they don't have the trust, they won't cooperate. But what I try to do that no other speaker does to blacks, I try to always explain the psychological ramifications of how you got where you are, why you got the problems. Let me go back for a second. Okay, now let's take a community. See, when I told you a few minutes ago, you cannot do anything unless you have a community. You can't practice politics. You can't do anything economically without a community or a sense of a community. You must have one of the two. You must either have a physical community or a broad sense of a community. Now, why is that important? Because you see, that's your foundation. Trust comes, what most people don't know, trust comes out of a community. The trust is the second floor up. The first floor is a community. If you don't have a community, you can never get trust. You can't get the trust. And the third floor over trust comes cooperation. And over cooperation comes accountability. So let me make sure you understand those points now. So see, when black folk, as long as you're integrating, you cannot have a community or a sense of community. And without either a physical community or a sense of a community, you can never get trust. You can scream all we want to about why black folk don't trust each other, but trust comes out of a community or a sense of a community. Are we together now? And in other words, if you don't have a community, you can't get trust. Then once you get trust locked in because you got a community, now it's possible to go to the next step, which is what you're talking about. Now you can get blacks to cooperate on going into business together. And then after you go teach them how to cooperate, then you go to the next step. You can learn how to hold them accountable for the products and services and goods that they're putting out. And that's the problem. See, blacks don't have communities. Now, we had communities at one time. Those communities were forced on us by segregation and Jim Crowism. Now, Harlem, for instance, would have been the most powerful city in America or in the world for black folk if black folk had never integrated. If black folk in Harlem had insisted that that they be given the only thing that was missing. What was missing was the tools of empowerment, the money, okay? But what they did instead, blacks bought integration and scattered out of Harlem and turned Harlem over. And now no place in America. And what whites also did once blacks bought the integration bit, they then took the Highway Act of 1952 and drove an expressway through every black business district in the United States. I can go into any community in America now, and I can always find the old black business district by finding expressways. The black business district will either be underneath it or beside it or over it. Because, see, again, whites did not want you to build and formulate wealth. Wealth can only be formulated based on maintaining a community. If you don't have a community, you can't do anything. You can't get to your trust factor. Am I clear on that now with you? Okay. Now go ahead. I'm sorry. I mean to cut you off. Right. Well, see what he's done well, and he's to build a community here. Yeah.
Let me say, and I appreciate that, Julius, and it's what bothers me about men more than women. All right, and I can say that we only have
One in here.
one sister.
Two.
All right, but see, my point is, I get tired of brothers running in here with some damn idea. They want me to make work, all right, through my community. I don't know you, you understand? And I mess up with my community
He's in
based
trouble.
on some BS with you. I no longer have a community, and plus your ass is gone,
That's right.
all right? And that's my biggest problem. You gotta understand that if we don't build community, now that is my strength. I have a community, you know, that I can ask, do what you said do, that I can go to and say, let's burn the mortgage, that I can go to and say, let's take over the Lindenwood and the Galaxy. The people who eat down there are the people that trust me. But because some dodo doopity-doop walks in here and says, I got an idea for a restaurant, I want you to help make it work, take a long walk off a short cliff. Because we can't come back to you and say, the food ain't good, the floor ain't clean, it stinks in there. You've got to be accountable if you want the community to work with you.
See, but it's not fair to do it to him. But you know what? See, he's already a model of what we're talking about doing. So you can't ask him to do very much more. See, you all got to pick up a lot of the burden. Okay.
Yeah, but this is my point. I'm willing to do more. I'm willing to do more. But brothers got to understand that you can't just work out there. You got to build the community. People got to have a relationship with you.
That's
you got
right.
to talk to people. You got to show up in church. You got to study the Bible with them. You got to go on fellowships with them. You got to join the choir. This is the market. You talk about jumping into something that Japanese and white people already got going. And you think just because you gonna own the place that them same folk gonna keep coming. Not so.
No.
They will stop their market, turn it somewhere else, and then you don't have a market. And next thing you say, black man can't own nothing. You haven't done fundamental work.
And Rev is absolutely right. See, what happened, what black folks don't understand is that the three reasons we don't have a black business structure in America right now is, one, we never made a national commitment to do it. Two is because whites are boycotting you. And three, we are boycotting ourselves, okay? And it's not only in the white, when I say whites, now that also speaks for these ethnic groups. See, right now, you will never ever see a white man on a Saturday morning get in his car, drive down to a black community, go into a black store to buy anything made by a black person being sold by a black person. Never happened. If you do, take a picture of it, okay? Right now, I can go on any Friday, and I can guarantee you I can go to any community, and I'll bet you over 50% of the black folk are talking about they want to go out to a Chinese restaurant and take his wife out for dinner. Have you know what I'm saying? That's right. But have you ever heard about Chinese, for instance, trying to get together, go over to a black community for dinner, buy anything? See, because they're running games on you. They're taking money out of your community. And that's what the Rev is saying to you. See, nobody will spend money and support us on anything, and we're busy trying to support everybody else. But it's all up to you all. So you all, once you make the commitment and come together as a community, you become a force then to be dealt with. But he built his community. And he has that reputation nationally now for having a very strong community that he can get things out of. But that's why I keep stressing that. And I guess I'm the fool nationally, keep talking about you can't do anything without a community. Everybody else says you can get a computer and do it. You know, I don't believe that. And so that's why I keep having conflicts with all these other speakers in the country. They're saying, well, you know, you can overcome this racism or doing this. That's BS. You cannot. You got to go back and rebuild communities. You got to build a level of trust. You got to build a level of confidence. You got to build a level of accountability. You got where people can depend on you and will trust you and do things. And we're the only people that somehow always looking for the magic bullet on how we're going to do things. I don't believe it can be done. And that's why even where I disagree with my good friend Tony Brown. See, Tony will tell you, get a computer and you can overcome racism. I said, that's bull. You know, whites ain't that dumb to let a black person get a computer and overcome racism. Racism is a power relationship between groups. How in the hell am I having a computer going to overcome racism? And I'm not picking on my friend Tony because Tony and I are good buddies. Yes.
Yeah, well, we're all in that. We're all in agreement that something should be done economically. And this is it. Now, this thing is, I have to admire it because I have found this is more fruitful than any black church I've ever been. I've been in black church all my life. Now, the only thing is about we found out that we could put up enough money to cut our margin and we could destroy that. Now the idea is, I don't think any of us is worried about money, but the idea we talk about economics. If we all have to just no more than put up $10 a month, whatever it is, we can do that because we work as a group.
You can't. Right.
So actually, we're just it's money anyway, and so actually the point of it is we don't trust each other. We can go out there and get insurance.
Right.
So the idea is about it. We have to start somewhere. You say we got to get so
Right. Well, here's one thing I'm going to propose to you. And I'm going to have to do a lot of this because Rev got more than he can say grace over already. I'm going to be coming to you with a lot of possibilities, you know, things that might work. And again, you all just save your money and you just pick any of the things you might be possibly interested in. Just save your monies. We're going to be creating leather industries in America. We're going to compete with the current leather industry that's coming out of the Far East. We're going to create our own leather plant. We're going to build a processing plant over in Haiti. We're going to put a cut and sew operation on the East Coast. Might even be wind up being New York. We're going to slice and dice the leather in 4 different ways. We're going to sell shoe leather. We're going to sell industrial leather. We're going to sell purse and bag leather. We're going to sell wear leather. And we're going to have blacks in all these different leather areas that they can put their money into it. I don't own any of these things. This is stuff that you all can do, but we're going to set it up for you through the Harvest Institute. And the reason it's going to be important for you is the next spring, next June the 19th, as I said, we're going to have our first Powernomics seminar, not seminar, but a convention being held in Los Angeles. And we're trying to pull together all of our ministers and our churches who support the kind of things we're doing. That's why we're going to ask the Rev to help us. Now, one of the guys that's been very helpful to me now, as an example, is Reverend Fred Price. You know Reverend Fred Price? See, and he preaches, you know, prosperity for black people. He said, Dr. Hans, he said, I was on a plane, and said, I've read your book, and I've seen your tapes. He says, whatever my church will, I'll give it to you. And he's been very helpful to me, and he's picking up a lot of the cost for me to hold that convention out there. We're anticipating somewhere maybe between 50, maybe up to 50,000 to maybe even as high as 100,000 people coming out there. We're going to lay out a whole new direction, philosophical direction in this country by changing the vision. We're moving away from this dream. I don't want black folk dreaming anymore. I want you to have a vision. A vision means you got your mind's eye wide open. I don't want you sleeping and fantasizing. Secondly, we're going to change it. I want black folk to understand we got a new paradigm. A paradigm means how you see things. Black folk now, since 1638, keep looking at things between integration and segregation. I keep telling black folk, that's not your choice. Quit looking at things between integration and segregation. The issue is aggregation. You know what I mean by aggregation? Aggregation and concentration of wealth and power. That's the issue. It has nothing to do with integration or segregation. But again, that's why I have these disputes with the civil rights groups, because they keep giving you that kind of a choice. They asked me that back during integration in Florida when I was only black in politics. And a one white guy came up to me at the Hilton Hotel and said, Dr. Hans, I don't understand what you're talking about. He said, on one hand, you got Malcolm X screaming about segregation, and you got Martin Luther King talking about integration. Which one of y'all, what's end of the stick do y'all want? I said, I don't want either end of the stick. What I want is for black folk to have the same rights and privileges that you all have, to come together as a group and aggregate and concentrate our wealth and power. You don't ask the Indians that. You don't ask the Chinese, what do y'all want, integration or segregation? So quit asking my people that. Let my people come together and pull together as a community and put themselves together, get their wealth together. I know I'm way over my time, so Rev, you stop me whenever you want me to now. Okay, yes, sir.